time, I felt betrayed that he held no remorse of leaving, that he had no sympathy for our hard work, and that he suddenly changed his mind about everything that he used to say about YouTube now that we're making more money. Obviously, I was happy to give him more money. We were making more money, so to pay him for his talents is fine, but I was angry at his approach. So we fought. We didn't fight for 1 hour, we didn't fight for a day, we fought for a couple of days. It was back and forth, and we have said a lot of things to each other, which I apologized immediately after I got off the phone, and it wasn't pretty. I don't remember a lot of things we said to each other because it was 11 months ago, but the emotions are all still here.
In a way, this makes sense. Receipts back up that Steven had baited Dan into a call. In a way, it makes sense that he may have made some cruel comments in the heat of the moment. He doesn't seem like an inherently cruel person, and even in the stream, Steven made one comment that always stuck out to me.
He'll either try to go at my money statement or the employee statement that I made, but I know for a fact that he said that, and there's nothing that's going to change my mind.
And I'm often less critical of streams because they're not scripted, they're not organized. You have to take what people say in the moment with a pinch of salt. But the structure of this comment always said to me that he acknowledged that Dan may have been behaving irrationally at that point, regardless of the fact that he said it. And Daniel admits it. It makes sense that maybe he'd be angry at that point. This doesn't make the comment right, but with this situation, it adds up. I can see why that would upset Steven, and I'm not invalidating that. But Dan justifies why he would be upset too. We say cruel things sometimes. However, for a moment, we need to remember that this dispute didn't start in the call. The dispute started before the call because there is a fundamental difference in how these two people view contribution. And that disagreement is once again put under the microscope in Dan's video. And in these parts, he can come across as a bit elitist.
For the rest of that summer, we put all our time and effort into making more videos and running the channel. Hosa was drawing animations, I was writing scripts, I was editing, and just overall running the channel as a channel. It was a good time. Steven was just still coming on occasionally, recording, and then leaving for weeks or months at a time while we did it, but that was okay too. He said he's doing this for fun, he's just doing this a hobby. He didn't see it as a career, and we were all okay with that. As the channel grew, we started making revenue, actual money. It was insane, and when it happened suddenly, and it was something we never really expected. When we started to make money, I told Steven that we want to pay him. He declined, but I insisted that he at least take something for his time of recording with us, so we mutually decided to pay him $25 an hour for his recording times. This is where the $225 came into play. From September 22nd of 2018 to February 22nd of 2019, of that 6 months, he worked a total of 9 hours, which was fine. I thought I was compensating something for his time. He was having fun with his friends and getting some cash out of it. I didn't care if he didn't work a lot. He wasn't taking YouTube seriously. And of course, I wanted to compensate him more. So I was going to take him to Disneyland and VidCon, all expenses paid. We're going to have a lot of fun. The fact that he valued his 30 to 40 minutes of recording the same with the amount of sacrifice and effort that Hosa and I put onto the channel was insulting, and it made me angry.
Now, in principle, I can understand why Daniel would clearly view this input as somewhat limited, and not to the degree that he has committed. But everyone who's involved with the YouTube knows that firstly, a creative job extends beyond recording. And in Steven's video, he vocally calls attention to the characters that he fleshed out and the effort that he put in. He may have recorded for a certain amount of time, but the impact and the thought of these characters exist beyond that.
Formal Mafia Steven, Huggy Zombie Apocalypse Steven, Hosa Steven. Daniel didn't give me a script to do those characters. I made them up, and I made my personalities enjoyable. But to Daniel, every recording session, I was merely talking to friends. To him, I wasn't putting in any effort into the videos.
On top of this, it's important to remember it's not just about the amount of work one does, but their contribution to the branding and image of the channel. If your face is on the merch, if you're advertised besides the brands, if people come for your quotes in the videos, that's prospective income based on viewership and support. It doesn't matter if that character was fostered in 5 minutes or 5 years, because a majority of financial income for these sorts of channels will come from the audience connection with the character. A characterization that brings people entertainment or hope or anything of the sorts is not something you can base solely on the work behind the scenes, even if it is significantly more difficult than the work in front of the camera or the microphone. The first abject disagreement we encounter, though, is regarding negotiation details. Steven states that in the call he requested a 20% share of income, which is corroborated by Jay. Daniel frames it much more harshly, stating that Steven demanded a third of the income share, or else he was going to walk.
Steven continued to say with his associate that if he doesn't get 33% of the company and the revenue, that he is going to leave the channel.
Now, this point was anticipated in Jay's video, that clip I told you to keep in mind. Some people have used this as a means to invalidate Daniel's point, but anticipating what someone will say does not necessarily mean it's invalid unless you have solid evidence for that assertion, and all Jay stated was that Dan may be confused as someone else proposed it. Now, this may be the mysterious figure that Daniel alluded to, however there is very little detail regarding the identity of this additional person, other than they would need to have been physically with Steven at that point. As we can see, the 7-minute call was between two users. Due to Steven's streaming comments, some people have said it was Hossa, but I think in Steven's video and streams, he was implying that Hossa had been negotiating following the call rather than in the call.
And I made Hossa get involved as well. Hossa, I really am sorry that I made you get involved in my fight, but I'm also really grateful that you did.
What I do find strange is following these aggressive negotiations that they then settled on a still rather underwhelming $100 per video for Steven, which if you consider the alleged income of the channel is still less than 1%.
I insisted that he at least take something for his time of recording with us, so we mutually decided to pay him $25 an hour for his recording times.
Daniel signals that he insisted Steven took $25 per hour of recording prior to these negotiations, despite Steven's apparent refusal at the time, and uses it like he's a generous guy, but then decides not to insist Steven have any more after his apparent aggressive dissatisfaction. It doesn't add up here. And that's not the only thing.
After the March incident, we renegotiated my salary, or rather the amount of pay I was getting. And I remember him saying, "What do you want to get paid now?" I said, $100 per video. I didn't say that, but he offered it. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. And then afterwards, he said, "Okay, I hope you know that $100 is a lot of money."
He says that I made him take the $100 per video, and that I guilt-tripped him into taking it, and I forced him to take it. These are untrue. At the end of our fight, when he decided to stay, he then told me that he wants $100 per video. He could have said more. I would have not mind that. That wasn't point of the fight. That was not point of the argument.
When I say I find these details strange, I don't mean I find them strange in the sense that they incriminate Daniel, but it equally doesn't make me think that this is a one-sided affair or that he's blasted these allegations away. Unless Steven planned out how to throw the channel under the bus in a dramatic way 10 months in advance, which there is no evidence of, I have trouble seeing this specific argument as anything else than a couple guys with vastly different perspectives clashing furiously over them, realizing that it wasn't getting them anywhere and coming to some sort of reconciliation with the expectation that for both of their sides, it could improve. But it wasn't a real reconciliation because the initial problem that provoked it was still there. Both sides are just full of interpretations that view the other perspective in unequivocally bad faith. Steven says that Dan claiming something's a lot of money was manipulation when he might just be a stingy person. Dan states that Steven was claiming that Daniel tricked him into taking less money, but Steven never claimed that because he notes that they'd already agreed on a figure. As for who proposed it, who knows, as most of the fans recognized it was like watching an embarrassing divorce. Daniel's video can be equally as cynical as Steven's. They have highly cynical perspectives on each other's actions. For example, Steven viewed his request of asking what more he can do as a genuine plea to try and earn his place on the channel and a greater share of the business, and Dan's perspective didn't connect with me at all about this.
But when he saw that his initial strategy wasn't working, during our argument, he switched and said, "What can I do to get more percentage?" At that point, I realized that appreciation or more involvement wasn't what he was looking for, but more profit.
That's why we fought?
Like, you say you considered him a friend at all points, and then say something like that. Like, you acknowledge it was a heat-of-the-moment argument, but then make a point which would question his intent regardless in that moment. And it's not like I think Dan is at liberty to give anyone any more of a management role in his channel. From the perspective of management, if that's what he wants to retain, then that is fair. Dan wanted to control the channel. I don't think he's completely arrogant as other videos have portrayed, but I do think he likes to do things his way, and he didn't want interference. He wants to be the director, and that's okay. But I think Steven genuinely wanted to justify and solidify his role, but I don't think that Dan had anything to offer. I don't know if Dan's trying to completely shield his image, but an explanation like this would make much more sense than the clumsy account that he provided. I think the main problem here was that there was no real way to justify that someone's character was worth less than 1% of the channel's worth, and by not offering even a share of that, it clearly left a bad taste in Steven's mouth. In his original video, Steven states that he asked a very specific question twice, asking how much his worth is.
9 months ago, when we argued, I asked Dan how many views on our videos were garnered by me. He said he didn't have an answer. A few weeks ago, I asked him the same question again, and his answer didn't change.
And although he left details out of Dan's reply in the DMs, the political, vague nature is highly unsatisfying. Simple as Steven wanted to know his worth, but I don't think Dan either knew or wanted to think about it. This is also why he probably offered to help Steven in the creation of his own channel. This sentiment was echoed in Jay's video, and although Dan didn't get the chance to respond to that one, it was a similar message. He wanted to help grow his friends' own channels and shout them out, even mentioning Vanos Gaming.
I suggested an idea to Steven that we make him a channel of his own, a company that he can run. I did this for a couple of main reasons. One, so that he can have the freedom to create and the business decisions that he wants to make is his own. Two, I wanted him to learn how much effort and time and sacrifice it takes to run a channel. And lastly, I wanted us to have a partnership. Once I realized he wanted to take YouTube seriously, I wanted him to make a channel of his own where we would promote it, where we would try to help it grow, where I would give him and suggest things that help a channel to grow faster, and hopefully develop a relationship like, the Vanos Gaming group or the David Dobrik group. But he declined.
Once again, it just seems like a fundamental disagreement of how they wanted to operate. Not everyone wants their own channel, and it's a very strange philosophy that Daniel has, though I think he genuinely believes it. He wants you to understand the sacrifice. It's daft. And of course, Steven would have been able to understand the work if Daniel had given him a way to earn his share, but Daniel didn't value his intent at that point. If you didn't want someone to expect more from a channel that their face is featured on, you shouldn't have let them on the channel. On top of this, the character dynamic in gaming videos like Vanos is so unbelievably different to the By the Way series that there's no real way to draw a parallel which justifies that point of view. I would argue that with gaming channels, there are many more other in-game factors that can influence the entertainment value of the content and its marketability. And although there are other elements to consider with Dan Plan's animated content too, the interplay between the cast is such a significant selling point. It's not the same. I do wonder if Daniel had a legitimate nostalgia for his gaming days and the creative control that it gave him. In spite of all these points, the Way situation does go both ways. Dan stated that it was Steven who offered the $100 rate that they switched to, so the responsibility of that fact has to partly lie on him, providing it's true. But Steven's point after this argument wasn't that he wasn't satisfied with the money, but that no matter how hard he tried, he wasn't recognized. He didn't feel like he was a friend. He wanted to be noticed by Dan. He wanted to be credited by Dan, and he wasn't. He portrays himself as not being obsessed with the money, in fact, rather claiming Dan was.
I don't think he'll milk this. I think he wants this to blow over as soon as possible and get back to business, because that's how he makes money. Views on his videos gets him money. And that's all he cared about when he started the channel. Like, beyond a doubt. Because if he didn't, he wouldn't be taking such shady practices behind the scenes. Doing such shady practices behind the scenes.
Dan does rebut this at one point in response to the stream.
And when Steven quit Dan Plan, he's told me that he still wants to be paid for all the videos that will be posted in the future, which I said I would honor. But then on the live stream, he goes on to say,
I didn't want zero recognition, because that's entirely what this was about. Honestly, I didn't care about the money. I still don't care about the money.
which contradicts what he texted me.
But this is one of the weaker rebuttals again. You don't have to care specifically about the money to still want it for the work you've done, because it could be about what the money represents, a recognition of one's work that they've put in. I don't care about sponsor money that much, but when I do the sponsor, I still expect the payment. For my own personal pride, to know that I'm worth it. If he really cared about the money, I find it unlikely that he would have settled for such a proportionally low amount, given how much the audience valued him, regardless of Dan's perspective. It's very easy to blow up this drama, and it did blow up, and everyone piled on. But you can't lose sight of what inspired it, the fact that a person just didn't feel like he was part of a family that the audience perceived as existing. That's what you had to combat, and in a way Dan did combat that, but he kind of misses the point again.
If I really thought of him nothing more than an employee, I would have never taken him to VidCon or Disneyland. If I was not friends with him, I wouldn't be friends with him. If I thought that I didn't think of him as a friend, I wouldn't invite him to go camping with me. I wouldn't introduce him to my girlfriend or my family. I wouldn't take him to camping. I wouldn't try to go watch movies with him. I wouldn't invite him to the parties I would only invite my friends over to.
There are no real receipts provided for this. I'll provide benefit of the doubt that they probably happened, because it doesn't change the point. The point was that whatever happened outside of YouTube, it was an insult to Stephen how he was treated on the channel. He felt like an employee. He felt perceived as one, and I believe that. I struggle to imagine doing a collaborative channel with a legitimate friend and not having a shares-based agreement. But simply put, I don't think Daniel viewed it as collaborative. I think that no matter what happened in their discussion, no matter how angry they got, the fact that they never came to the agreement that there was a way to share income was the most indicative factor in the failure of their friendship. Because a share is not just worth, it is trust, and there was no trust here. It's claimed that Dan doesn't even share income details with Hosa, but that is not mentioned. Dan references the trips to Disneyland and VidCon, but Stephen himself in the stream that Dan responded to said that he felt the intent wasn't there.
When we went to Disneyland is pretty much when I thought it was getting better. But then I saw Daniel pull out a camera. And then I knew for a fact that he just wanted me to dance. So I danced. And then I knew for a fact that things weren't going to get better.
In the Disneyland video itself, uploaded to Danplan, Stephen makes a pretty snide quip that was left in.
Or are you sick?
Sick of your crap? JK, you paid for something.
That aside, because Dan was quite possessive regarding what he viewed as his own channel, Stephen interpreted it as a sense of worth and greater trust. Maybe it was to an extent. I don't know. But I don't think it was necessarily malice on Dan's behalf. I think it was ignorance. And I think that ignorance was willful to an extent.
I forgot to mention at the end of the video because I got a little emotional. But for transparency's sake, I want to say that I have heard whispers of Stephen planning to do something along the lines of making a video after he left. So it wasn't 100% surprise when it happened. Nevertheless, the content was still upsetting, and that's why it was still very shocking. I wanted to end the video there. I didn't want to say anything more. That was just my side of the story.
I don't think Dan was that shocked. I think the strains must have been clear, and Dan didn't do enough to avert it because he probably never considered the consequences. And when he did, it was probably too late. But that's not necessarily a one-way street. A lot of public drama on this scale happens because one party decides that actually they don't want to talk it out privately. They want to go nuclear. They want to call someone out. Now, Steven's video isn't your typical call-out post. It doesn't seem tailor-made to be a channel-ending video, but I think its impact spoke volumes to how people viewed him as a part of the channel. However, with the whole future of the channel in jeopardy, was it worth it? And was it the right thing to do? In Daniel's response video, he posts various conversations between himself and Steven. The relevant conversation showed the aftermath of Steven's private departure from the channel. Daniel is very attentive after Steven lists out his personal issues, suggesting twice that they meet up, which is something that Daniel himself references in his response video.
So first things first, before he released that video, I already wanted to talk to him in person. In regards to him leaving, I asked him once after he left to meet up. He said he wanted to do it in a call, but we never got in a call. And then later he texted me again and I said, let's please meet up, let's have some coffee. But he declined again.
Daniel knew there was an issue. He wanted to resolve it privately. However, sometimes things shouldn't just be talked about privately. Sometimes we do need to go public with our grievances to make sure that a person is held to account. There are plenty of situations where such a promotion can help other people come forward with their own problems. And plenty of times, a private conversation with a coercive person can help suppress possible consequences facing down a person and postpone the ultimate confrontation and maybe make this person's abuse of power even worse. Sometimes it can be an intimidation tactic, but it's hard to tell with a lot of people. Was going public relevant here, especially in the way that Steven did? Let's talk about it. Well, firstly, I think what we have to discuss is why on earth Steven decided not to talk it out in private. In fact, why he never indicated at all that he planned to make a video, while still talking to Dan at that time. To many people, such behavior would seem pretty snaky, and to be honest, they're not inherently wrong. If we discount the idea that he had malintent, why would he do this? I think the one quote that explains it is here.
So, do I think there was any way to avoid the situation? No. A heavy hand is only moved by a heavier hand.
He viewed it